Dziękuję, że są Państwo z nami. Trwa czwarta już edycja konferencji Drugie Życie Budynków Polska i Europa Środkowo-Wschodnia. Tak jak mówiliśmy na początku naszego spotkania, dziś chcemy się zastanawiać nad tym, jak pandemia wciąż trwająca, choć na szczęście zmierzająca do końca, wierzmy w to bardzo mocno, wpłynie na rynek nieruchomości i na życie miast. Jestem przekonany, że wszyscy mamy w pamięci te zdjęcia z Londynu, z Rzymu, z Mediolanu, zdjęcia z miast, które zawsze tętniły życiem, a nagle opustoszały. Nawet zespół Rolling Stones zainspirował się tą nagłą zmianą naszego otoczenia i tak powstała piosenka Living in a Ghost Town, a w teledysku możemy zobaczyć właśnie puste, całkowicie opustoszałe ulice Londynu. A jak my odnajdujemy się w tych miastach, jak my z nich korzystaliśmy i jak będziemy korzystać teraz, mając wciąż w pamięci te wszystkie obostrzenia? Czy to naprawdę zmieni nasz rynek w perspektywie przyszłych 5-10 lat? O tym chcemy dzisiaj rozmawiać z naszym wyjątkowym gościem. Już za chwilę połączymy się na żywo z Jeffem Risomem. Jeff pracuje w wyjątkowej agencji Gehl Making Cities for People, która tworzy projekty przyjazne ludziom, tworzy miejsca, które mają służyć nam do pracy, do rozwoju, ale też mają stawać się integralną częścią miast i tej miejskiej tkanki. Połączmy się więc z Jeffem, bo wiem, że już jest i czeka na spotkanie z nami. There he is. Jeff, good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here.
We are online, so I know we are in Warsaw, but you can be like anywhere in the world. So tell us, please, where are you now exactly?
I am in Copenhagen, in my office, which is downstairs, but in Copenhagen, Denmark.
Okay, I can see a bed in the back, so I thought it was your bedroom.
Well, it's a spare bedroom. So yeah, this is the modern life that we're in. You have to excuse the intimacy of that space.
Oh, not at all, not at all. Just tell me, what's the weather like there? Because here in Poland, we finally can feel some summer mood.
We can finally as well, and it makes everything much easier. So we're all happy.
Well, the life did change a lot recently, and I guess this is the moment where we can start your presentation. So what else is there to say? Jeff, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. So it is finally the summer, and finally emerging from this strange time that we've had. And I think, really more than ever, what we see going forward is going to be a need for designing for connection. And when I say connection, I mean between people and between our friends and strangers and being together again, essentially. And so that's what I want to talk about today. Really, this building a little bit about what we've learned from COVID. We've studied many different cities, gotten a lot of feedback, questionnaires, information from people, how they've used the city through the pandemic. That's part of our core approach of understanding citizen data, you might call it. We're thinking a lot more about social infrastructure. And these elements, which we'll talk more about, really are going to be driving real estate, we think, in the future. And especially when you think about the central business districts, or when you think about sustainable models such as circular economy, circular real estate models. So those are the things I want to go through. Not to talk too much about COVID, but just to show that we've actually gotten research and information from many different places around the world, and have seen some surprising trends where folks use public space, they use their city more than previously. So we saw more old people, more children out in public space across Denmark and the US, higher percentages of folks, even though some might have felt vulnerable, they spent more time outside. We also saw that some streets and neighborhoods rebounded quite quickly when things opened up, where other commercial streets had a harder time reopening. And we think we've learned some lessons about that. I'm going super quick through this data because we don't want to talk too much about COVID. But the point is that folks that were alone, to a large extent, felt more alone and maybe felt uncomfortable outside. On the other hand, we saw many more people using the city, as I mentioned. And so together we see that people are longing for connection, but it's not the same type of connection, right? There's many different layers and types that we need to be aware of and be conscious of providing different invitations, many varied invitations for being together. You can see more information about that COVID study. It's just covid19.gehlpeople.com. Anyway, so this idea of what is the connected city, right? So what I mean by connected, it means that racially and ethnically, we have a chance to connect across different religious groups, even across income levels. This is, apartment complex in Copenhagen, the highest square meter prices in the country, and yet there's still a public space where people can swim and share that space together with the people that live in those exclusive apartments. So whether it be income or age or functions or housing type, so connections in many different formats. It's probably somewhat obvious, but just to be clear that the connected city is good in many different ways, whether that be about safety and health, democracy, which we see so important to be able to continue to express ourselves democratically, but of course also in terms of sustainability. So this idea of connection, also I want to be clear that it exists on a spectrum, right? Just by virtue of feeling welcome in the same place as others, we might have passive connection, passive contact with different people. As we move towards a place where we might have an opportunity for interaction, for a conversation, then we're getting closer to empathy, for really putting ourselves in other people's shoes, and maybe even moving towards a connection and contact that's much more about compassion. And now we're beginning to generate social capital. So we're benefiting social capital. We're benefiting economically, socially, health-wise, from being around and being connected to others. This, we know that there's a few different ways for this connection to happen, but it's basically the things that we share in common, irregardless of our background, right? So play, pets, kids, these are all sort of catalysts for some of this connection. But we see this story where we've been talking so long about the resilient city. Yes, we need that to continue. Health is becoming a bigger and bigger issue, obviously, through the pandemic. But maybe we also need to tell a very compelling story about the next decade of the city. I think being at least about these three things, and really emphasizing it in even more explicitly. So when we're thinking about connection, how are we connected? We need to learn a little bit about our clients, right? About the people that are in our cities. And so if we talk about citizen data, we can begin to get some really good insights. So at Gehl, we have thought a lot about this, and we see a huge market, right, of sensors and smart city researchers and startups and big companies, right, all trying to capture information about how people use the city. And we think that's important, but we want to make sure that we know why we're collecting that data, and that we can use it in a really meaningful way. So at Gehl, we talk about this Gehl lens, which is essentially the way that we can focus on the lived experience of a wide variety of people in cities and neighborhoods. And so we talk about lived experience that manifests itself in different ways. That might be through social media postings. That might be through conversations with folks, intercept surveys. It could be through observing people. There's a lot of different layers, we think, to getting this data. And to talk just about two of them, which are sort of key, is that we can use social media insights completely anonymously, completely respecting all GDPR laws, using some public social media data from Instagram in particular, but also from whether it be Facebook or Twitter, to understand, in the case of Instagram, what people are taking a photo of, what's Instagrammable, where are they taking those images, what types of spaces seem to be the most shared. So this understanding that information together with then going out and observing what's actually happening. So we're connecting the digital and the physical world, And here, this public life app is about observing, well, who is in a location, what's their age and gender, again, anonymous, but getting an insight about what activities are people doing, where are they spending time, how long are they spending time. Together, we can really get some quite, I would say, qualitative insights into citizens or into the target market, essentially, right? And so to tell a quick story about how this is applied, we have been working with the city of Copenhagen, supermarkets, some different food vendors to think about how do we both invite youth to a food behavior that's in line with their values. We know that Generation Z, youth between the ages of, really 14 and up, they're very climate conscious, they're very health conscious, but they don't necessarily have too many options to eat healthily, right? So we put this campaign together across different sectors, public and private, targeting essentially a neighborhood close to a school. So 12-year-olds in Denmark, they can leave their school and they go get food from wherever they want. So they're essentially creating their own food culture at this time. And we learned by some of this data and talking to kids that they'll visit, supermarket 3, 4, 5 times a day, the supermarket right across from their school. So we were seeing this sort of desire line, all these 12, 13, 14-year-olds making this trip and essentially buying, unhealthy food at the supermarket. And so we could follow that path and intercept them with new public space, a food truck selling healthier food, another public space here, an agreement with the supermarket, and really begin to shift data and shift behavior and understand the behavior of this target group and measure that over time. So we're able to keep track of, who is actually eating here, what are they eating, how is the sales happening, and basically getting very qualitative market analysis for whether it be food producers or supermarkets or the city to essentially understand how might we invite for more of this behavior and introduce youth as they shape their food culture to begin to use the city in different ways and make different food decisions. So that data is core to understanding emerging trends and understanding essentially where the market is going. Same time, now we've been living locally. We've been spending a lot more time at home, and the importance and the quality of our neighborhoods is really become more important than ever. So we know that essentially some things are happening, right? So neighborhoods and CBDs, this sort of the difference between places of downtown where a lot of offices are and our neighborhoods are blurring, our usage patterns are blurring. And just one quick data point here, this is the Town Hall Square in Copenhagen showing pedestrian traffic over time, and we're comparing it back year on year. So this was back in March, early March this year, we compared to March before the pandemic. And what you see is these numbers, you see, of course, a lot less traffic during the weekday, but we actually see more people going down to the Town Hall Square, the central business district, on the weekend now than they were before the pandemic. So it's just an example of neighborhoods are getting more important and the use of central business districts is changing. So we think part of the common denominator to bridge this gap that's going to be true of making the best CBD in the future and the best neighborhood is actually about social infrastructure. So we know we need roads, we need all the hardware in our city, but we also need to be very conscientiously aware of the social infrastructure, the playgrounds, the parks, the libraries, the places where community organizations can meet, the voting systems, all of these sort of soft, intangible parts of our life that really bind us together, that give us the scaffolding, the infrastructure for social connection, in the same way that infrastructure also provides pathways for heavy industry, traffic, et cetera. So what this means is that downtowns and neighborhoods need to be more than just urban form and architecture, right? We need to be thinking about arts and culture together with diversity, together with sustainability all together. And of course, probably everyone listening here has been thinking about this stuff for a long time and working with it, but it's more important than ever. And we need a mind shift to say that neighborhoods need to be truly dynamic, alive, diverse, offering all of these different invitations, whether it be cultural, play, exercise, work, live, eat, etc., in order to survive. Any kind of monofunctional area just isn't going to cut it. So a quick example of that is just work that we've been doing with Google in San Jose, California, where this idea of social infrastructure and the idea of the neighborhood was key to Google essentially getting approval from the city to begin to build this campus. So, and even saying campus is now a word that we're not allowed to say anymore, right? It's about building this new neighborhood that is where the social infrastructure plan is as important as the building plan and is as important as the mobility and transportation plan. So really investing in the concept of social infrastructure, building it up through conversations with stakeholders is vital for not only getting approval in a place like San Jose, but also for making sure that workers want to be in this place, a lively neighborhood, and to make sure that citizens who otherwise live in that neighborhood benefit from the investment that folks like Google and other businesses might be making, and understanding there's a virtuous loop, there's a connectivity between those different stakeholders that's vital. This is going to be, again, I know a lot of you in the real estate sector, I'm not sure exactly how it is in Poland. This is an article from, the Economist looking especially at the UK and the US. These, CBDs, people are going to go to work maybe only 3-4 times a week. That means that there's 10, 20, 40% less activity in places where people were working. Of course, that downtown area can capture more folks if there's people living there. Now there's not a net loss of activity, but I'm sure you're all reading lots of articles and wondering what's going to happen. I'm very much convinced that we need to create that office space that does not feel like a neighborhood is not going to survive. So we'll go to work more locally. That will impact the way that we work and how we think about the office. So the third, just final point here before I do a case study, is just about this idea of, what types of buildings are we going to need? What types of work environments do we need in this situation where we are at home more often, et cetera? So I think, that people will live where they want. And so that's going to be very, very important. And the location of their work actually will matter even less than it does now. So what I mean by that is already today, we had people using a lot of time at cafes and other sort of in-between spots. But the problem with these third spaces, you say you have your home, your office, and then a cafe or a place like that being the third space, is that they're still only catered to a particular kind of work. They're only sort of the informal meeting, maybe sitting at your laptop. And we know that there's going to be lots of different work needs that used to be done just at the office that don't function at home and don't work at a cafe that we need new spaces for. So whether that be, deep work, more strategic conferences, conversations that might be more where you need to, have more privacy and be more confidential, places where you can build things and prototype, pop-ups where you can sprint, week-long sprints with different disciplines. All these types of work activities need a new space to occupy. And for lack of a better word, I'm just thinking about this as a fourth space, which is, smaller than a traditional office. It's closer to residential clusters. It might be interchangeable with community resources, decentralized and maybe co-owned. This is not a WeWork model, I don't think, but maybe co-owned, particularly from a few different businesses. So an example of what I mean by that is that, already now we have seen buildings that change use. We all know examples from around Europe of churches that have been transformed to everything from community centers to bars. But now we're seeing more places like restaurants operating as co-working during the day and then restaurants in the evening. And I think the future might be also where we're creating buildings that are more neutral, right? They're multi-purpose from the beginning. So they're really able to have activity and usage 24/7, 365. And that becomes interesting from a real estate perspective, where maybe you're able to have, rent out the same square meters multiple times. Instead of having one tenant, you might be able to have two or three. That could also be complicated contractually, but I think through, whether it be blockchain technology, things like smart contracts, it seems like now's the time to connect some of these concepts. And so part of it's going to be digitally enabled, and part of it's also going to be just rethinking how we site and position our buildings, making sure that public-facing amenities like exercise areas, kitchens, et cetera, are pushed to the front of the building, easily accessible from other users outside, and just basically rethinking the program of buildings to make sure that they're used much more often. We see examples like this. There's probably some in Poland as well coming up. I think the key is that this idea of school in quotation marks, if we're making a multifunctional building, we can't call it an office, a school, or whatever. It needs to be neutral so that the various users that we imagine using it each have an equal stake in not only the design of the building, but also its use after it's constructed. So again, that approach, if you're following different circular real estate models, this has a ton of potential in terms of using space that might otherwise be wasted, opportunity to, again, rent out the same square meters for more tenants and having multiple leases simultaneously. And easier said than done, but I think, again, needing to work simultaneously with this new type of neighborhood scale also calls for new types of buildings and new types of lease arrangements. So the final bit here is just a quick case study where we can see in the US, a lot of people have moved out of New York. I think they'll come back. A lot of people have moved out of San Francisco. I don't think they'll come back. But where we see some places that have been the winners from that exodus from California, New York, have been places like Austin, Texas, places like Denver and Colorado, and places like West Palm Beach, Florida. And the things that these places have in mind that are attracting folks from the traditional sort of magnets of workers is that they've been able to open up after the virus relatively quickly, lower income tax, basically more affordability, places that are more affordable than these very high cost ones. And I think that's going to be true in different markets, right? And I don't know the Polish one as well as I should, but I think if you think in your own head, where are locations that might have some of these qualities, then I think it's going to be interesting possibilities there. And so an example, we've actually been working in West Palm Beach for the last 5 years and can see it really primed for this sort of renaissance, attracting folks from New York and other places. And one of the quick examples here is a place called Rosemary Square, which is essentially part of a mall, right? So in the early 2000s, this is an outdoor mall. Florida's got great weather, so it's all kind of outdoor. And there's a part of that mall that had worked pretty okay, even though it was almost 20 years old. Active edges, but a majority of that mall, many of the square meters of frontages actually had no activity. And when we observed what was actually happening there, we could see that plaza had much more life, much more use. It was the magnet, whereas the rest of the mall really hardly attracted anyone. So the place, when we started working there in 2015, was very disconnected. Even though it was open air, it's still sort of with lighting and different signals, essentially looked inwards and had a half of its ground floor retail essentially underperforming. And that's not surprising, what we saw is because it was a traditional mall with anchors, anchor stores, singular patterns parking around the edges. And what we learned, though, is actually the anchor is the plaza, right? That was where we saw all the life. So then how do we capture that plaza? How do we capture the culture that was essentially emerging there and catalyze it, fast forward it, make more programming opportunities for education, for art, for fun, for play, for spontaneous events and activities, to really make sure that, and you all probably know this, right, is that experiences, that's what's going to keep bricks and mortar retail going, is the experiences that you can't get purely from the products online. So in that way, all those experiences, all the culture, all the mix of activities, that's really the anchor. And so we shifted, sort of repositioned this idea from, parking going to the heart to now having a neighborhood, basically a district, a real piece of city, a real place in the city that can function as a neighborhood. But hey, you also have retail options, right? So this is what it looked like before. One of the streets, this was the proposed scheme we made. Now it's opened up just before the pandemic, actually, and has done incredibly well, right? So here's that square that was already working. It's doing much better, much more activity along its edges. Again, a huge investment in art, in play, and fun in there as well to draw these different folks, and also opened up, right? Moved much more from this, now you're coming to the mall to, hey, we're an integrated piece of the city. Spend time here if you're shopping or not, because there's lots of other things to do. So that combination of activities, Florida being more attractive from New Yorkers, this place really being coming online as a great neighborhood just after the pandemic, has meant that while a lot of places were struggling to get new lease tenants, City Place has landed great new emerging brands, Lululemon, Lucid Motors, Nantucket. These are all brands that you might not know, but they're higher end, they're emerging, and they're coexisting in a place that also welcomes pretty much everyone else from the city there. And the people shopping at these locations love that there's always life and activity. So that's really, what some trends that I wanted to share and what we see from different parts of the world, where lived experience, culture, that's going to drive retail. We think that's still going to be, doing quite well here in the next 5 to 10 years. There's still a need for it. The neighborhood mentality, whether it be around retail or office, is going to be super, super important. The more mix of uses, the more diverse activities, the more invitations for connection that I mentioned at the beginning. And then these emerging, concepts, whether it be around the fourth space, circular models for real estate, or whatever. But at the end of the day, again, emphasizing any type of work that we can do as architects, as developers, as real estate folks, to connect people, to connect experiences, and to invite for many different types of experiences, that's going to be even more important than ever. So thank you for listening. I think we'll have some conversation as well, if I didn't take too long.
No, thank you, Jeff, so much for such an interesting and meaningful discussion. And yes, there are some additional questions I would love to ask. I hope you can hear me.
Yep.
Right, you're still online. Thank you so much. Just to let you know, I'm not a professional. I'm a journalist who covers very different topics, and retail and real estate is only one of them. That's why some of the questions might be very general. But when it comes to the offices and going to work, do you think that the age of the people has an impact on their attitude? I mean, if we are talking about those who have been working in an office all their life and suddenly they had to go online, and those who are much younger and are used to different forms of work, I mean, do you think that this will have any influence on their attitude and on the fact whether they will be eager to go back to regular working in an office or staying at home online?
Yeah, super interesting question.
Thank you.
The way that you, yeah, the way that you frame it. But you know what? I think because it was so long, where it's a year and a half, almost, maybe, yeah, a year and a half at least for folks. Even if they were, older, never used the technology, they've been forced to use it. And because of that sort of necessary shift for young and old workers alike, I don't think that's going to make a difference, to be honest. I think the biggest difference is going to be how much space do you have at home, and how good is your neighborhood? How much do you enjoy spending time there locally, versus how nice or depressing is the neighborhood around your office? So I think the quality of the office environment, the neighborhood there, quality of the home environment inside and out will be, I think, a bigger driver than age. Although it's a fascinating question, so I'll have to think more about it. But that's the first pass anyway.
Because whenever we wander around the city, we can see the skyscrapers, we can see also the construction sites and new skyscrapers being built, especially here in Warsaw. So the thing is that as I wander around the city, I look at these buildings and I think to myself, well, won't they stay empty? Will there be anyone working there? So from your point of view, is there a threat? Is there a threat that new buildings won't be built, or those who are already now existing won't be fully covered?
Absolutely. I think that's a huge risk.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's going to be ghost town, right?
Well, it could be. I mean, I don't know ghost town, but I think it could be, again, 20 to 40% less use. If people are there 3 days instead of 5, that's 40% less use activity than what it was maybe planned for. And so, again, I think so if it's a pure office tower, ghost town. If it's a neighborhood with only office towers, it's going to feel weird and empty. So it needs to have other things happening for it to survive some of the things that I mentioned, I think.
Well, it's not that I'm a pessimist, but there's another threat then, I think, because if an office tower stands like that, empty, it may get older faster. A building needs to live, a building needs to earn money, sure. And it needs to be renovated from time to time, modernized. And if it's not used, then maybe there won't be a necessity to invest in the building. So it's going to get older faster. And this will have an impact on the way the city looks like, or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that I definitely agree with you. If, it becomes a cycle, right? And if people don't like to go there, if it feels empty, then less people will go there. If no one's there, then the maintenance drops, and then the building gets older faster, right? So you can either have a vicious cycle where pessimistic, or if if folks are quickly able to adapt, reposition some office buildings into lower income housing, rethink ground floor environments with different forms of not only retail, but also, production of light industry, food production,
exactly,
whatever it might be. So we need to very quickly experiment with some other uses and get those into these buildings to create a virtuous cycle where then more people are coming. And it's like that example I showed in Copenhagen. It's interesting, more people are visiting the downtown office area on the weekend. Why is that?
Why is that? That's a good question. Maybe they miss it because they work at home online. So that's where they spend their working time. So when it comes to the weekend, they want to see the old office.
Or maybe exactly. I would argue that if any of y'all have been to Town Hall Square in Copenhagen, it's a place where you feel connected. There's other things happening, and there's you get this idea of like, oh, I'm not just alone in my home or in my neighborhood, which might be quieter. You feel like, oh, I'm in the city. I'm seeing different people. So I think that I still think that that's part of it. I don't think they're necessarily looking at their office. I know you were joking, but I think that there's another draw there that's not just about work, right?
And don't you think we are in a trap at some point? Because when the pandemic started, we were all locked in our homes. So we missed the parks, we missed the outdoor life, the outdoor activities. And lucky were those who had even a small garden. And so on the one hand, we want to have a garden, we want to have a home, we want to have a place to go out and feel secure in the pandemic. But then, on the other hand, we want to feel the city vibe, and we want to live downtown. So, is there a solution? And do you think that in the future, people will choose to live in the city centers or in the suburbs, in the friendly neighborhoods about which you were talking?
Yeah. Well, so again, a great question. And I think you have to ask yourself, and again, if I use the US as an example, it's like, why would you stay in New York if you could live much cheaply, much more, affordably, and have the bigger garden and everything in a place like, Denver or Florida? And so I think that obvious draw is happening. But now, if you get to that place and it's boring, or if it doesn't have all the diversity and activities and connectivity that I mentioned,
I would say this is very ironic, because first we want to live in the suburbs and have the garden, so we all go there, and after a few years we say, no, it's way too far. I don't want to spend time in the traffic jams, so I want to be back in town. I think this is going on right now in Poland.
Yeah. I think it's and we have to. We have to be attuned to it, right? I think trends like that are happening faster. Maybe that what you just mentioned, urban to suburban, that might have happened over a generation before, right? You grew up in the suburbs and you moved to the city. And if you grew up in the city, you moved to the suburbs. But I think, we're going to see, more shift faster, depending on life, where you are in your life cycle, children or not, et cetera. But I think, I don't know if this is contradictory, but my point is that, again, back to this idea of comfortable neighborhoods, the best schools, the best parks, the nicest, interesting cafes, the opportunities to have culture. I think it's going to be these like neighborhoods, these many different nodes. The most successful cities will have many different nodes like that. We won't have the one downtown or the single, the one downtown with all the suburbs around it. I think that's a thing of the past.
All right.
And we're moving in another direction.
We're moving in a different direction, and we hope it's a sustainable direction. Thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us. Have a great day.
A pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.